5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Space Business Podcast, where we investigate all the exciting ways in which people participate in the new space economy by conversations with entrepreneurs, executives, investors, and other members of the space family. I'm Raphael Roettgen, and I'm an investor in and advisor to space companies. Just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and nothing should be taken as investment advice. Sadly, I am not a rocket scientist, but I am an alumnus of the International Space University, which is also our partner in the podcast. Here's a short message from them.
The International Space University, founded in 1987 in Massachusetts, USA, and now headquartered in Strasbourg, France, is the world's premier international space education institution. It is supported by major space agencies and aerospace organizations. ISU offers the Master of Science in Space Studies program at its central campus in Strasbourg. ISU also conducts the highly acclaimed 2-month Space Studies program at different host institutions in locations spanning the globe, and more recently implemented the Executive Space Course, the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program, and Commercial Space program. ISU programs are delivered by over 100 ISU faculty members in concert with invited industry and agency experts from institutions around the world. Since its founding, 33 years ago, more than 4,800 students and participants from over 100 countries graduated from ISU. Follow us on social media at ISUNet.
On this episode, we will hear from another space startup from Switzerland. WeGaw analyzes satellite data to understand snow cover. You may be forgiven now if you think, like I did, that this is mostly about skiing. There's actually much more to this business. WeGaw's co-founder and CEO, Ion Padilla, will walk us through it. Enjoy. So hi, we got Ion here from WeGaw. Ion, how you doing? Welcome
Hello,
to the podcast.
I'm good, and you? Thanks.
Excellent. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm currently joining from south of Spain. I'm in Malaga at the moment.
Excellent. We're doing this remotely today. I'm in my office in Central Florida. Probably a place where we will never use your product unless we have severe climate issues. But probably in Malaga, on the coast, neither. But Jan, speaking of your product, why don't you give us the elevator pitch on what your company is about?
Sure. So at WeGo, we focused on near real-time space data processing. And our first product is focused on snow monitoring. So basically, using satellite imagery, weather, and ground data, we process it using machine learning and remote sensing in order to monitor snow worldwide. The main appliances for these snow and snow melt sort of data are for the hydropower and utility sector. So basically, by monitoring snow melts, will help these companies into better forecasting the inflow in the reservoirs and therefore the production of electricity.
Understood. Yeah, we'll talk about all your different customers in detail, but I have to ask, how did you guys come up with snow? I mean, I know you guys are based in Switzerland. Was it as simple as you didn't trust the skiing forecast, or what is the origin story there?
Well, it was pretty much looking out the window, right? No, actually...
not this year.
Not this year, no. So actually, I think it's one of these classic startup stories, right? We are one of the few startups in the space industry that is not coming directly from the space industry. Both co-founders, we were not in the space industry before. So this is straight coming from a problem we encountered, which was that it was primarily for tourism in the beginning, which was that when you're going out there as a hiker or skier, it was really difficult to grasp really high quality snow data. You will have some, precipitation, etc. But in the end, if you wanted to understand if there was snow at a specific location or not, if you had to wear specific equipment, you couldn't. That information was not available whatsoever. And then we started digging a little bit in that problem, and we realized that that was extended for several industries. Like, for example, hydropower, they had really big problems into forecasting snow melt, what is called the snow water equivalent. And likewise for water utilities, like we're talking before about California, for example. These guys, in order to understand how much water they could expect in spring, they need to climb up to Sierra Nevada and measure the snow with some really manual field surveys. So in a nutshell, snow in the end is a really important resource that converts into water, and in specific locations that are close to mountain ranges, it represents up to 80% of the irrigation for agriculture or the base for electricity, for example, in hydropower. So that's a little bit where all these sort of visions started building, and we realized that in order to get high quality snow data, we had to look at space.
Yeah, so because I guess the way snow is currently measured, correct me if I'm wrong, is probably in a really manual way. Is somebody's going out there, or how does that actually work?
Exactly. So there are two main problems to how we measure snow today. The first one will be the actual way of getting that snow data, which is really manual, is either through field surveys. So that means sending a team up to the mountains in order to understand how much snow there is in a particular location, or through with using specific hardware. And the other problem is that all this data is used every now and then. Some energy companies, they calculate it every season or every twice per season. And then what they do is that they run what is called a snow melt model. And that's how they eventually get the predictions of how much snow water equivalent or how much water is going to be flowing down their reservoir. So that means that is, one, the data is quite scarce, and second, the data is modeled. So usually energy companies, they don't have observable data. They work with model data. So that's, let's say, the combination of where this problem is coming from.
Understood. But I mean, I myself live part-time in Switzerland, as you know, and of course, when we live in Switzerland, we do go skiing a lot usually. When you go to the skiing resort websites, and there's obviously also some general websites on snow reports, I mean, it looks like they have some sort of data which is on a more frequent basis. But is that still the case, that basically they have some sensors or somebody manually measuring it, or how does that work?
Yeah, for the ski industry is a little bit different. So there are some ski stations that are really, really sophisticated, and they have some sensors that they put in specific locations. Obviously, an area of a ski resort is much easier to measure than a complete catchment area that could be, hundreds of square kilometers. And so on one end, some of them, they have these sophisticated hardware, which is not usually the case. What usually you will encounter is a meteorological forecast. So basically, they tell you, hey, yesterday we had, 1.5 meters of snow that fall. Usually you have like 30 centimeters or 40 centimeters of snow that fall. But it's really difficult for them to actually tell you how much of that snow that fall melted, or how dense is that snow that fall. This is coming from a weather forecast. So actually, even if there were 30 centimeters of snow that fall in the form of precipitation, you cannot really know when you go up there how much of that snow is still there, and if how dense it is, and therefore how much water equivalent you will have in the end.
So this brings up a good point, because again, as a skier and also as a hiker in mountains, I know that snow doesn't equal snow, right? I mean, there's different types of snow, and there's this old cliche that the Inuit, the Eskimo people, they have like many different words for snow, and I guess we have that a little bit even in English, right? You can talk about powder, you can talk about slush, that kind of thing. Is that something you guys capture as well? And how is that
useful, if so?
Indeed. So we have different products inside of our main umbrella snow monitoring product. So the most basic one that we are offering to our customers will be the snow cover extent, which is basically telling our customers where there is snow or where there is not snow with really high precision. Currently, with the sensors available, with the satellites that we have launched, this is relatively easy to guess. And then we can get more sophisticated with, for example, radar technology. We can get into analyzing the wetness of the snow, right? So radar technology is relatively easier to detect wet snow because of the reflectance of the wet snow. And then the further that we start digging into the technology, we can get information around snow depth and finally around snow water equivalent. As far as you go to snow water equivalent, then you will start inferring more and more and modeling more, depending on the case, obviously. But yeah, ideally, what we're offering is apart from the snow cover extent and snow depth, the possibility to analyze the snow, the wet snow.
Understood. And then talk a little bit about your main customer groups. I mean, you've mentioned the hydropower, and that sounds very interesting. It's probably not something that a lot of people have thought about. But what other groups are there, and which ones are the most important ones for you?
So when we're talking about customer segments, we are focused on these, let's say, energy or hydropower companies, which are primarily two, right? Is the classic hydropower, energy creation from dams, which they need to have, and they need to have under control. The core of their business is the prospection of how much water is going to go through their turbines, right? So that's where everything is sort of orbiting. How much of that water can be converted into energy? How much of that water will need to be spilled? And that's the core business, right? That's all the revenues coming from those decisions. And on the other side, we have utilities, which are either energy distributors or water distributors, which they operate in a similar way. Instead of having a dam, you will have a reservoir that you're using then to treat the water and then effectively distributing it. So those will be, let's say, our main focused markets. Then we have obviously adjacent markets. This product is cross-industry, and it can really affect in many, many different industries. We have some customers in tourism. So obviously, as you might expect it, ski stations, outdoors and ski platforms or digital products are interested in serving this information to their customers. And then we can get even more sophisticated, for example, for insurance product that they have snow exposures, like, for example, winter kill crop insurances. So that means some crops they have some risk when snow falls that they could be potentially lost. If you have X amount of snow in a wheat crop and the temperature is lower than X, at some point that crop will die, right? So that is one of the let's say insurance protection that they have to work. Likewise for in the financial sector for trading, when they need to hedge or trade with in the energy market, they could take potentially into account the hydropower creation, for example, in countries like Scandinavia, like 90% of the energy is coming from hydropower.
Understood. And when you approach some of these customers, particularly, I suppose the B2B one, and it sounds like you're very much focused on the B2B for the moment, is that sort of a very much a bespoke consulting type approach that you kind of engage in depth with the customer and see what they need and then build a product around it? Or is it sort of more on the platform end of things that you have sort of pre-designed solutions that you're selling to those customers?
Yeah, so this is a really good question because this is something that we have been reflecting a lot in terms of how the scalability of the company will work depending on where you sit in that value chain, right? So the closer you get to the inflow prediction for the energy company or the utilities company, the more let's say bespoke you need to be, right? The more unique the product has to be for each client because different orographies, different regions, different dams, everything will affect the final prediction of energy capacity of a specific hydropower plant, right? So on our case, what we do is that what we stay is in becoming the leaders in the snow monitoring sector. So that means that we can exactly tell the energy companies how much snow there is and how much of that snow will eventually convert into water. And then they will take care of taking that information and, let's say, predicting how much of that snow will eventually come into as inflow of water into their turbines. So that means that our product it's really scalable because we don't have to modify, or it's not so much consulting when we're engaging a company, right? We have the data that is produced in this way. We can directly create an integration to your current hydrology model. You ingest the data, and since the data is more accurate than the one that you have currently, that converts into better decision making and effectively into more revenue for the company. So that helps us and gives us the ability to be much more scalable, cross country and cross industries.
And this, I assume, do you have some initial customers that you're already working with, some Swiss utilities maybe?
Yeah, the problem is that all of them, they're really protective. So all of them, they are forcing us to sign NDA. So we cannot really talk about them. But yeah, sure. we're working primarily with two energy companies.
Understood. And what's your sales process like? Is that pretty much a typical B2B sales process, that you have somebody who's dedicated to this type of sales, going out and approaching the utilities? And then when you had your initial discussions, because I suppose this is a very new way of doing things for a probably relatively conservative typical utility company, was that something that they immediately is that something they immediately understood, or did you think like, who are these crazy space guys? What do they want here?
Well, that's a really interesting thought, because they are indeed conservative, but they do as well have the same pressure that any business will have, right? So we're primarily talking to the trading and planning groups when we're engaging with an energy company. And, I have been talking to the head of trading, and he's telling me, look, I have a lot of pressure from upper layers telling me that we need to create more revenues, yada. So the thing is that when we show up and we say, hey, look, we don't need to be operational tomorrow, but look, if we can put together a POC in a couple of months and demonstrate that we can get, a small, even if a small, let's say, error reduction in your inflow prediction, in the amount of water that you expect in your turbines, this is definitely a major thing to bring to your management, right? Because that's how you are going to be able to predict better and infer better what is going to be your moves if you're in trading or in hedging, when you will need to turbine that water in order to gain as much money out of your energy, depending on how the market is looking like, right? So that gives them a lot of leverage for internally as well. So that's how we position. So even my sort of conclusion will be that even if you're talking to a really conservative company, if you have a product that is directly hitting the bullseye in their revenue making, they need to listen to you. They are going to sit down with you.
And is there a way, I know it's early days for you guys, but is there a way with the customers that you're already working with to quantify this benefit? Sort of like how much in additional revenues or trading profits they've been able to make, and then also kind of contrast that with, the price of the product, I suppose?
Yeah, so this is exactly what we're talking about this with one of the customers, because even though if you're moving into a proof of concept with them and you are already showing good traction and improving the numbers, what everybody wants to know is, okay, so how much money am I making because of using your product? That's sort of the gold question, right? It really depends on the energy companies and how the hydrology companies and how they sort of operate. So, for example, with one of them that we're working, they have a neural network that they have trained with the data in order to do the decision making. So the neural network is going to tell them, hey, you need to remove from the reservoir, I don't know how many liters of water now, because in 2 weeks there is going to be a lot of water coming, and it's better that you turbine and make energy in 2 weeks, that the electricity price is going to be higher than you turbine now, and then you make room for more water to come in 2 weeks. So as you can see, it's a really specific decision making about opening the gates to let the water flow, or when you are going to generate the electricity and how you're going to distribute it in order to make profit. And so for us to sort of quantify what is going to be the economic impact, the only way is to do a proof of concept, run the proof of concept, and then compare the decision making one with the other without the snow data and with the snow data, and see how those decisions affected in the long run. So as you can see, it's quite complex. There are ways of making it extremely simple, which would be how much water you saved. You didn't have to spill it because of the snow sort of monitoring, but that will be like a small quantification of the whole value that we are giving them. So yeah, it's pretty complex. We have some models that we do internally at WeGaw with lots of research that we have done on the field. But each energy company for this would be different.
Understood. Is there like some sort of, back of the envelope calculation you can make, sort of like, let's say you look at one of the utilities you're working with, is your goal to sort of, I'm just trying to understand how ambitious this is. Is your goal to sort of like, well, if everything works perfectly, we think we can, increase their revenues by, 2%, or is it like 20%, or is it somewhere in between? I know this is a hard question.
Yeah, so this is indeed a hard question. So let me answer it the most pragmatic way. So what we tell them, basically, these energy companies, usually they have between 10 and 20% error in the run of calculations, which is the calculation of how much water is going to be melting from snow, which is the primary, let's say, error in melting season, which is basically when the problems come, when you have a lot of water coming through the mountains. And basically, with our initial estimations, we are helping them into improving that error between 10 and 15%. Now, if you take those numbers and you say, okay, so with DFROST, we're going to correct the error, let's say 15% from our current inflow predictions. But how that will convert into actual additional revenue for the energy company, that depends on what amount of decisions are going to be taken by that energy company by having a less error in their energy forecasting predictions. So that's why it's quite difficult, and it varies quite dramatically between one energy company to another one. So yeah, those are the calculations.
Understood. Let's maybe look at it another way. Are those companies currently getting, let's say, this kind of data or even similar data from any sort of alternative, maybe even with manual sources? And if so, do you have any idea how much they're paying for that currently?
Yeah, so basically, let's put it this way. You can get access to that data currently with, let's say, either manual or tools that have been used till now. To be very honest with you, energy companies are starting to look at space data now. That's why it's relevant, obviously now, and how space data can adjust their current model. So in a nutshell, what we're basically doing is helping them with space data to adjust and reduce the error in their models. That's exactly what we're doing. So in terms of the amount of the amount of money that these companies are spending per year in modeling, it ranges between the tens to the hundreds of thousands, depending on the size of the company, to gather these data.
Okay,
yeah.
Understood. Because as you probably imagine, my last couple of questions were basically trying to estimate some sort of market size. How are you guys thinking about that? And then, so how big do you guys think your market can be? And that's obviously the market we're talking about right now with the energy companies, but then also other potential customer groups.
Sure. So yes, then we can talk about how we have modeled the go-to-market at WeGaw. So basically, we're looking at our target market, which is hydrology in particular, right? Which is hydropower and utilities. So it's a market of around 600 million, more or less, in terms of if you take into account the amount of dams that are in snow-prone location, the amount of budget that is spent into this kind of stuff, which was what I was telling you, that roughly is around 100 to 500,000 more or less into planning and to gathering all this information to create the planning service, and the amount of energy companies that are around there, which for our calculations are around 500 energy companies. And they have a total of more or less 15,000 power plants that are currently running. These numbers are obviously growing by the day, because hydropower is quite a sexy product at the moment because of obviously climate change.
Sure.
and the clean tech ecosystem. So from our modeling, taking into account the numbers that I have just told you in terms of the inflow predictions that we are helping them, our calculations is that we would, on average, help them into improving the inflow projections, and therefore on around 300,000 to 500,000 euros additional revenues per power plant. So a company that has 10, 20 power plants, that will be quite a significant additional revenues that they will be creating with our product.
Those numbers are global numbers.
Yeah, so this is obviously based in how we have structured the modeling of our go-to-market. This obviously changed a lot if we're talking about a Norwegian hydrology company, or we're talking about Californian, utility companies. Some of them, they might have a lot of impact from snow. Some others, the impact of the snow will be reduced. Each energy company is different. For example, we have an energy company that we're working with in the Alps that is quite high, and therefore when the product is really useful is in melting season. Is usually when it starts snowing and when the melting season starts. And we have another company that is in a southern region, and therefore when it starts snowing in October, November, then it could be that you get completely melted in December because you had a bad season, and then it starts snowing again, and then starts melting in February because it was too hot. So you have a lot of ups and downs, and the product there adds a lot of value. So it really depends in the different dams, how you structure the reservoirs, the portfolio of the energy company. But obviously, what I'm giving you is really rough numbers that we use for modeling the go-to-market.
Understood. So what I'm hearing is that maybe sort of a large utility customer, given the amount of money they might have in additional revenues, for a customized solution, they might of the data, they might be paying you something like, I don't know, 50,000, 100,000 a year. Is that about right?
Yeah, the ticket usually ranges around that. Yeah, from 50K to 300K, depending on the amount of dumps that they have. Understood. It might be, I mean, some energy companies are really, really, really big. Sometimes they have groups, and it could be that, a ticket can go higher. But on average, let's put it that way, is around there.
Okay, understood. And then coming back to my personal passion of skiing, is there any sort of other plans at any point in time for like a B2C product, like, something we can download on the App Store that's giving us much better snow data that we can currently get?
Yeah, so you're coming to the core of our question, of our mission. So this company started as a B2C company. Like I'm assuming 80% of the startups, right? So they're young and fresh, and we thought that this could be a really nice opportunity to do a B2C sort of platform in which people will see the snow, etc. The problem is that when you are talking about a high-tech company, and you need to, on one end, create a really complex, space-related, or I wouldn't say that, like a really high-tech product that requires like a lot of brains to work together, and at the same time, you need to build a community that is sort of engaging with the product, that is sharing and commenting, liking, etc. Your product is such a different skill set that it becomes really, really difficult for a low resource startup. So that was one of the hard lessons that we had to take in the beginning, and say, if you are aiming to build a really, really high tech product, you need to go for B2B almost 100%. There are a few exceptions, of course, around there, that they have built a high tech product that can have a B2C sort of focus, but for us, it just didn't work.
Understood. So it sounds like you had to pivot away, as many startups do, for sort of like, short-term economic considerations. But is it still part of your medium-term roadmap?
No, we're not. To be frank, we're not considering B2C. Is out of our models, and it's not even inside our plan, our really long-term plans. We see that the opportunity is quite big as it is, because that will require that we'll need to sort of build up a really strong marketing and communication department with all the all the rings and bells in order to make that sort of B2C vision work. Because we know some people that they created a really, really high engineered product. You basically put it out there. You go to Product Hunt and you say, "Hey, we have this product. Check it out." Then you can have a big pool in the beginning, but then you need to have the community around it in order to grow it, or you need to have a massive capital in order to grow the numbers of that B2C vision. So it's quite complex.
Yeah, understood. I'm clearly disappointed as a skier and a hiker, but
I'm seeing that.
I see where you're coming from. Let's change tack a little bit and talk about where you're getting your data from. And correct me if I'm wrong, if I remember correctly, so you guys are not vertically integrated. I think you guys are basically buying existing data of other people's satellites. Is that correct? And if so, like, whose data are you using? And how is that process? Are there any challenges in that process of getting and processing that data?
Yeah, sure. So as I said in the beginning, we're focusing in near real time. So that means making our data as available as quickly as possible. So in order to do that, what we do is that we ingest as many available satellites as possible. So currently we're using Sentinel and Sentinel Constellation, and then NASA satellites. Currently we're using 7 satellites. in our product. So basically, it's a combination of different resolutions of different sensors and technology in order to have the final product. Obviously, that's the main. The main data, but then we combine that with what we call ground truth in order to calibrate our algorithms. We have through one of our partners, we have ground stations and high resolution cameras that we use to validate the product, and then we use ancillary data like weather models, temperature, solar radiation, etc.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, and by background, I'm a machine learning guy as well, I suppose. I was going to ask how you train those models, and then I assume it must be the way you just described that when you train the machine, the algorithm to detect that really this white patch is snow, you have to give it labeled data that's coming from somewhere else, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So that really depends. So obviously, we're not using machine learning for the whole thing, is for a specific reason. So, for example, we can talk about the cloud occlusion problem. So when we're talking about optical data, you have the main problem is when you have cloud, you see nothing. So there are we're using machine learning techniques that is using basically historical data and certain confidence rate that we assign to each pixel depending on our machine learning algorithm that basically will remove the clouds from the picture. So there are specific tools and methodologies that we use in the pre-processing of all the data in order to remove, in this case, it could be remove shadows or remove clouds, where machine learning comes really handy.
Understood. And then you mentioned a resolution of the data, and so I just want to follow up on that. Can you give us some, basic data points of both spatial resolution, so what's how small a snow patch can you detect, and then also what's the temporal resolution? And for the listeners who are not familiar with the term, that basically means how often are you able to look at the same spot?
Sure. So in terms of resolution, we give daily data with 20-meter resolution. That's our flagship product. Then obviously we can adjust because sometimes we have some customers that they're looking at a different sort of snow product that is not as reliable or as precise. So we have as well a 375-meter resolution product that is obviously cheaper for them, so it adjusts really well for different markets. So that gives us the flexibility. But again, that's really depending on the client. If they want to go down to 1 meter, and we need to use Airbus satellites or whatever, we could eventually do it. The technology could work potentially the same way.
I assume the clients in the end, that they're paying based on some of these metrics, right? Like how big the area is that you're surveying, and then also what the resolution is. Does it work like that?
Usually we charge per point of interest or per usually catchment area, right? So usually energy companies, they will have a specific location in which they want to measure the amount of snow that it would affect. So if we're talking about a big valley, usually the river is where all the melted snow will eventually come to, right? So that will be their point of interest, and we're basically charging in our subscription model per point of interest. That usually is the catchment area that comes to the reservoir or to the power plant. So basically, yeah, that's how we charge.
And in using that third-party data, did you find that relatively easy to do, or does it depend on the supplier, or were there any challenges in that?
So the challenges, in this case, we are, so the startup is partially funded by the European Space Agency. So we are in their, as part of the Copernicus program, we are in the business applications demonstration project phase. And basically, well, it is really easy to get access to Sentinel or European Space Agency satellite data onto NASA data, but on top of that, with the European Space Agency, you have a whole ecosystem of tools that you can use to treat all that data, and and sometimes it's even pre-processed. So it's really up to you. In our case, obviously, we want to get as fast as possible the data, because as I said, the faster we can give the snow data to our clients, the best they are going to forecast the current info. So basically, it's in our interest to get the lowest pre-processed data and process it in-house, right? But yeah, it's really easy when we're talking about open data. With private data, that would be a different story.
I guess what I'm hearing here is if we have listeners who may be thinking about doing a startup as well in the sort of the downstream data sector of space, that if you have some experience analyzing data, and if you have maybe a data scientist or several data scientists on your team, what you're saying is then it's completely feasible to do this.
Yeah, definitely. What I'm trying to say is that the let's say the key to using space data is not really the process of analyzing the satellite imagery. I mean, we are all the time in the space sector. We're all the time talking about the same problematic, right? The key is not really the satellite imagery; is the combination of satellite imagery with external factors. So it's a combination of ground truth, how you combine it, ground sensors, and any other input that you can combine it to get the most better outcome of your product, and how that product integrates in your customer, right? But it's not just about having the best product out there. It's just having the product that in the end is going to be easier for the customer to use and will create the best sort of outcome for the business case that you're proposing, for the use case that you're proposing.
That's getting basically also at sort of like competitive advantages. So let's talk about that a little bit. Are there any people who are trying to do similar things to what you are doing, and if so, like how do their approaches differ?
Yeah, so there are obviously many competitors. This is something that has been studying for a long time in academia, and there are different approaches from different people on how this could be solved. So you have some companies that rely more on hardware. Some companies, what they do is they put some cameras on the different rivers, and then they can better, let's say, predict the inflow. If you put up there, you will be able to predict easier the water inflow from the snowmelt. There is another company in Germany that they use a specific GPS solution to infer the snow depth and the snow water equivalent, and obviously many of them are chasing how to solve the problem of calculating the density of the snow using primarily satellite data, right? So that's basically the mission that we are currently executing, and that's partially has been studied in academia, and yeah, so that's basically our main advantage, right? That's the fact that we're able to model snow water equivalent with purely spaceborne data, and without the need of hardware or field work in the mountains, is what eventually is giving us the competitive advantage for our customers.
So there aren't any competitors, you're saying, who are also taking a space-based approach? Or for example, any of the sort of like generalist Earth observation companies, some of whom offer, like a wide range of observation products and analyses. Are any of those also trying to compete on this?
So no. Yeah, I'm saying that there are some hydrology companies that are already working with MODIs. Those are the first sort of approach to this. But MODIs is coming with the problem of clouds, and MODIs has a really low resolution, 500 meters. So it's a first sort of good approach to solve this problem and to adjust hydrology models with snow data. However, let's say that the holy grail is to be able to obtain the snow water equivalent without the need of any hydrology model, right? And that's something that many people are chasing. We are able to offer it now through our products. Obviously, it's not completely spaceborne yet, so we're using some other techniques, and we're basically modeling a certain amount of the task. But in our vision would be that in the future we'll be completely spaceborne.
Okay, and speaking of vision, that's a good seg. If you look out, like, whatever is a good medium-term time frame, that's like 5 years in the future. What is the vision of the founders for this company? What do you ideally want this to look like?
So for us in 5 years, basically what our plans are is to achieve these completely spaceborne snow water equivalent monitoring, and the impact that will have, because the only way you can get to measure snow water equivalent today is, as I said, through fieldborne hardware and modeling. Our vision is that we'll have a product that is purely from space, giving that information out, and that has an implication cross industry, right? We're talking about agriculture, we're talking about water utilities, insurance, flood risk, everything that is related to how water method from snow is impacting any business. And obviously, apart from actually having the most sophisticated snow product out there, which is what we are actually chasing, is to have the foundation of near real-time space processing technology, right? So that will be basically our vision for the next 5 years.
And so if we look a little bit closer in time, let's say this year, 2020, what are your like major milestones? What do you want to achieve this year?
So for this year, obviously, what we want is to because we're opening around soon, more closer to the end of the year, but basically is to prepare the whole startup for scale up. That means obviously we have some engagements with energy companies, some proof of concept, etc. But ideally, all the objectives that we have in 2020 is to validate proof as much as possible the model with as much validity as possible, removing all the assumptions that we have currently by engaging in proof of concept with energy companies, so that beginning of 2021 we're in a position in which we can completely scale up, because we have already understood inside out the sales process. We have understood perfectly how the energy companies are operating and where we are adding value and how we can structure the deal, so that in 2021, once we have raised the money, we can pretty much put it in the right sort of slots and start scaling up the company.
And so those slots you'll put the money in, I assume, since you don't have any space assets, that's going to be primarily people, correct? Probably salespeople and data analysts.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, although we are a space tech company, because we're downstream, right? We operate as a regular enterprise software company. So when we're talking about growth, primarily 80-90% of that capital is going into sales, direct sales, sales enablement, etc. little bit of marketing and branding, but primarily is driven through direct engagements.
Okay. How much are you raising?
We're looking at 2 million.
Okay. So this is like a, do you characterize that as like your seed round, or is that already like a seed round? Okay.
Yeah, for us, it would be a seed round, if you want to call it pre-Series A. But to be honest, for me, is the finalization of the wrapping up of the product market fit.
Understood. And so far, you've been financed. You mentioned ESA, which we should talk about because that's, I think, interesting for a lot of potential European founders and angels as well. Or how have you gone about financing the company?
Yeah. So this is specifically for European founders. In the US, is slightly different. The European Space Agency has a really interesting funding program, which is primarily funding companies that are using the space assets that the European Space Agency has put out there. So if you're using Sentinel constellation, etc., you can benefit from this. And it's a really interesting program, and I really, really like it because basically what they are doing is that they are financing from 50 to 75% of the project, and the rest has to come either from your pocket or from private investors. So that means that it's not, like a classic European grant schedule. So you need to come with some capital from your side. So that helps into making the business model much closer to reality than a pure grant ecosystem, right? So that worked for us really well. So basically, we combine that capital from the European Space Agency with business angels and some private equity, and that was pretty much how we fund the company till now.
Interesting. And are there any requirements to access this pool of money? I assume there's probably something like you have to be based in an ESA country.
So we are in Switzerland, so we have access. It's you need to be part of, I don't know how it's called, but it's the European Space Agency ecosystem. So, for example, the way that it works for us is that the ones that approve the budget it will come from the Swiss sort of organism that takes part in the European Space Agency. So the money sort of will go from Switzerland to the European Space Agency and then back to us. So that's how the way it works.
And understood. And important to remind everybody here that ESA countries are not equivalent to EU countries. That's
exactly
specifically a comment to our British friends at this point in time, of course, who can still access ESA funds.
Because that's a really good question. I mean, the UK is still part of the European Space Agency ecosystem, right? They're really
absolutely
strongly into it.
So please, British entrepreneurs, do not feel discouraged. And this process of successfully accessing the ESA funds. Roughly, how much effort did that take? How much time? I mean, are we talking like a month, a year? How many man hours roughly? You think?
Okay, so I the other day I read an article that I found really, really interesting as a rule of thumb for any entrepreneur that is starting in this sort of career. Each month of work will represent $100,000 or euros in capital. That's pretty much it, or average. So. Yeah, usually the total amount of work that the European Space Agency, documentation, etc., it was close to 6 months, more or less.
Understood. Cool. And as you mentioned, you guys are based in Switzerland. How do you find the Swiss space ecosystem?
So this is a really interesting question. I found, I don't know yourself, but I found that in the last sort of 2 years, it was really recent, but in a really short period of time, it is growing faster and faster in Switzerland. And many people are putting more and more attention to the space ecosystem. So many of colleagues that I have, were colleagues or acquaintances that I had in the startup ecosystem in Switzerland, suddenly they are, part of a specific, board that takes care of space sort of budgets or new VCs into space, new companies that they're taking some of these that they're starting to take advantage of the space ecosystem. New companies that are raising lots of funds, like Picterra recently, that the guys raised almost 4 million, and Astrocast. So I feel that it's brewing really nicely.
Yeah. I mean, you ask how I see it. I think it's certainly it's very dynamic. It's growing. I think obviously the access to talent seems great, just because of the the high quality of the Swiss engineering schools. I think over time, hopefully, there will be also like more recognition on the political side and more support from that. Because Switzerland's historically very focused on that's like finance and pharma. But hopefully, I think down the road, it would make a lot of sense for Switzerland to support space.
It does. And I think now is the right time. I mean, you have some countries that are already taking the lead, and I think it's a good opportunity to get ahead of the competition, because everybody sees this space ecosystem is just blowing at the moment. Not only upstream, because upstream started to blow a bit earlier, but now downstream is becoming really, really important.
Yeah, and then. If I'm not mistaken, you're Spanish?
Yes, I am.
Has it crossed your mind to locate the company in Spain as well, or was it always Switzerland, I guess, because of your co-founders?
So look, both co-founders were Spanish. We met in university in Spain, but I have spent my whole professional career in Switzerland. And for me, starting the company in Spain was not easier. It was much more complex than starting in Switzerland, because I already knew not the whole ecosystem, but I knew some people that already were part of the startup ecosystem. I knew some potential investors. So it was relatively easier to launch the startup in Switzerland than going to Spain. And the ecosystem was much more let's say, tailored, I'll say. However, there is one big problem for Swiss startups, and it's happening. I mean, all my founders, colleagues have the same problem, which is it's extremely expensive. It's so expensive that you achieve to raise 200, 300K, and you cannot really run anything with that in Switzerland. So you need to either externalize it, or what we did is eventually we had some people in Spain. That's why I'm in Malaga. Actually.
Yeah, that was the gist of my question. I suppose if you're looking at things like hiring people, obviously if you hire some very qualified technical person, maybe it is arguably just better to pay up and get the person in Switzerland. But probably for certain other positions, you would probably pay a fraction in Spain than you would pay in Switzerland, I'm imagining.
Exactly. So if you are looking at, when we're talking about PhD, about, literally developing cutting edge solutions, in Switzerland is probably one of the best places to be, and really close to ETH and to EPFL is where you want to be, no doubt about that. But the problem is that, in a startup, in any kind of company, there are a certain amount of tasks that are more, let's say, rudimental, that can be developed by less sophisticated, team members. And, hiring a developer in Switzerland is completely, it's really, really expensive. And you're paying like 3-4 times less when you're moving to other countries like, Spain is one of them, but it could be, Ukraine, Serbia, etc.
Like you said, your professional life has been in Switzerland. If I remember correctly, you at some point in time you were even at CERN. How did you end up in this? How did you end up becoming a space entrepreneur?
Well, it's as I was explaining you in the beginning. I think it was because we started from the problem. We found a problem that was worth solving it, and eventually, when we were analyzing how to solve the problem, we said, well, we need to use space assets, right? And the fact that we are coming from CERN, because both co-founders are coming from CERN, we had lots of connections in the European Space Agency because, to be honest, I mean, they're really, really connected, although they do different things, obviously. But, I knew lots of people from the knowledge transfer department that were, in both organizations, and they're really close to each other. And importantly, they work similarly. So we felt that it was for us really, really comfortable to be in that space that was really similar to things that we were doing at CERN. And then the fact that we are not in upstream but in downstream, where the technological skill sets are slightly different. So in downstream is where machine learning, artificial intelligence, really high skill set in software development and architecture, DevOps are the true essence of the product.
So you didn't have to learn about launch and orbital dynamics, astrodynamics and things like that. But but once you realized that the best solution to your problem was space, I assume you had to learn something about space. What was sort of the biggest, not obstacle, but the biggest, learning challenge you had with regard to learning what you had to learn about space?
Well, yeah, it is like a really particular ecosystem. So there are a bunch of things that you need to learn. In the beginning, obviously, you need to learn who are the big players, how is the industry going, what is the direction that the industry is taking, because that's quite an important thing, right? So, and then you can participate in the ecosystem and you can share your views on how do you see the sort of ecosystem moving from your seat, right? But the fact that we're talking about how the space data is booming and how you have some generic platforms that are sort of giving you the way to operate downstream data cross industry, or the ones that are really playing niche in for cargo or for oil, etc. So that's all that stuff, and how upstream and downstream is dividing, and how the value chain works is really necessary for you to be able to understand where you need to position your company, and obviously this helps a lot when you're talking to investors, right? And why they take some decisions and why they invest in some type of companies and they do not invest in some other type of companies.
This is very interesting. If now that you know the space ecosystem a little bit more broadly because you're part of it, if you weren't doing WeGaw, what would you do? What would you find interesting?
Well, I think the fact that first of all, doing enterprise software would be something that I will always be interested in. I think that it really fits where I'm coming from, and the skill sets that not only myself but my co-founder and the team have really, really fit nicely. I will definitely be there. In a nutshell, when we're talking about downstream, obviously there are certain amount of techniques that we're using that are a little bit outside just software developing, and we're getting more into geospatial technologies, etc. But they're relatively close enough. So yeah, that's probably the place I would be.
Understood. By the way, it just occurred to me one question I should have asked, which I didn't ask. Since you're detecting snow, which I suppose is somewhere related to detecting ice, but correct me if that's incorrect, is your technology something that could also be used, for example, to detect patches of water ice on the moon?
Okay, so that's two things. The first one is, for the moment, we're focusing in snow. Ice detection is another sort of thing. Obviously, in our vision, the main vision of defrost would be, which is our main product, is called defrost, would be basically to understand how all the cryosphere will melt, and be able to have or monitor that melting, right? But that will come in a longer term. And then from the second question, where you're approaching for ice detection or melting water or water equivalent detection in other planets, if the sensors that we're using are enclosed in the hardware that is being launched, that will be completely doable.
Understood. Jan, we always close on the same question in this podcast because it is a space podcast, which is basically, do you like science fiction? And that is usually a resounding yes on this podcast. And
if you say no, we erase the interview.
We basically will not publish the podcast. And if so, what is your favorite or favorite science fiction books and or movies, TV series?
So by completely number one will be Dune. That's my main reference, and actually it's my favorite book so far. And the whole world that was created around Dune, and the world of Arrakis, and the sandworms, and the fact that is sort of the first ever idea around science fiction, and how everything has been created out of that specific idea. I found it really fascinating.
And are you talking about the book and or the movie? And I assume you probably have read the book and seen the movie. Did you find the movie was a good reflection of the book?
So yeah, I'm talking about the book, obviously. Actually the movie, I think was it a movie or was it a TV show?
It was a movie. I think it's a while ago. I'd like to say like early 80s. I mean, it has, the only reason I remember the movie is one of the sort of like actors in it is Sting, and he's really young and really skinny.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that. So I think I heard at some point around the movie around June, but yeah, I think I watched part of it, but it really didn't tick a lot to me. So I stay with the book.
Although there is, from memory, there's no snow whatsoever on that planet.
No. It's only sand.
On that note, Jan, thank you very much for joining the podcast. Good to have you, and best of luck with the fundraising.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for another nominal episode of the Space Business Podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving it a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, such as iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at podcast_space. Also consider supporting the podcast at www.patreon.com/Space Business Podcast. If you have any feedback, including ideas for guests, and that may include yourself if you have an exciting space story to tell, or are interested in being a sponsor, or really anything else, drop us an email at spacebusinesspodcast@gmail.com. That's it. I look forward to seeing you for the next episode.